Chapter 22. April. April glanced around the office one more time to make sure it looked presentable. Tori, the guy who had sent her an email about the job, was coming for an interview, and she wanted to make sure she looked more competent than she felt. The office still looked sparse, but at least now it looked more minimalistic than amateurish. All of the boxes had been unpacked and put away. Her room was completely in working order, and she had even brought in a computer for the receptionist desk and a small microwave and fridge that were currently in the third room. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would allow them to have a place to put lunches and heat them up for now, at least. The final room, the one which would be his if she leased it to him, had been painted a soft cream color, but it was empty otherwise. The walls were also empty. In fact, the only thing hanging on the wall currently was a welcome sign done in swirly lettering that she had found at a yard sale a few years back. But she planned to add some peaceful paintings when she could. The front door opened, and she turned to greet the man who might save her dreams. He was a large man with broader shoulders than most of the running backs on the Tornado team. His eyes were a bright blue, but not the natural blue she'd seen in eyes before. No, his almost seemed too bright, too blue, as if they were enhanced with contacts. And while there was certainly no crime in that, it jarred her.
"April, I presume. I'm Tori."
He held out his hand to shake hers, but it was his voice that caught her attention. It was deep and velvety, reminding her of the schooled and practiced even tone of James Earl Jones's voice. There was also no trace of an accent. Not that everyone in Texas had one, but enough did that someone with no hint could be easily picked out. She took his hand, determined to put all her strength behind the shake, lest he see her as a weak woman. First impressions were important, and she needed to convey strength if she wanted this man to see her as a boss, or, at the very least, an almost equal partner. "Welcome, Tori. I'm glad you were able to clear time." He had explained in his follow-up email that his clients were numerous and his schedule was generally full. April hadn't been sure if he'd been stating a fact or bragging, but looking at the man now, she could imagine his schedule being filled with women, even if that had more to do with his looks than his talents. He was definitely easy on the eyes. His lips pulled into a crooked grin, revealing perfectly straight teeth that were also just a shade too white.
"I had to offer an extra half hour to one of my regulars to get her to reschedule for tomorrow, but hopefully it will be worth it."
"Yes," April said, caught a little off guard. "Hopefully. You mentioned in your email that the place you're at now is too small?" He nodded and rubbed a hand across his chin as he glanced around the room.
"The place I'm at now is fine inside, but it's in an office building, which means parking is a pain. We have a tiny lot in a parking garage, so my clients are always complaining about parking."
He glanced back toward the glass window that looked in.
"I like that there's a lot of space out front."
"All right, well, let me show you the space. It's not huge inside, but there's a little room for growth. Obviously, this will be the waiting area. There's no real break room, so eventually I might want to wall some off for a small space, but there's a third room I'm using for that currently."
"Unless you plan to rent the other room to someone who would have clients waiting, I don't see much need for a large waiting room. Just a few chairs would probably be fine."
April nodded. She'd had the same thought. "There's no receptionist currently, but I figured we could have an answering service and answer the phone ourselves in between appointments." Tony shrugged his massive shoulders.
"Fine by me. Most of my clients text me anyway, so I wouldn't really need that."
"Okay, well, then let me show you the room." She led the way down the small hallway. "This one is my room," she said, as she pointed to the room on the left. "And this is the one I've made into a small break room currently." She pointed into the room across from hers. "This is the open room." She stepped back and allowed him to enter the remaining room. "But if you prefer the other room, we could make the switch as well." He stepped into the room and placed his hands on his hips as he looked around. With a single nod, he turned back to her. "It works for me. Where do I sign?" April blinked at him for a minute. She hadn't been prepared to have him sign on the spot, though she probably should have. Still, she'd wanted to make sure they would work together. It wasn't like they would have to spend a ton of time together, but she wanted to make sure he had no habits that would drive her crazy. She hadn't picked up on any, but she did worry they might appear later. However, she did need the money, especially with the increased medical bills she would incur with the pregnancy. "I'll get the papers drawn up, and you can swing by and sign them in the next few days. Will that work?" He nodded again. "When can I start moving in?" I suppose as soon as we sign." While she appreciated his forthrightness, it was unexpected. "Great. You have my number. Shoot me a text when you have the papers ready, and I'll swing by to sign. I can't wait to get out of the place I'm in." "Sounds good." As they shook hands once again, and April watched him leave, she couldn't decide if she felt relieved or railroaded. She'd hoped to meet the man and then have some time to think about it, but it appeared the decision had been made for her. Well, at least the money would help. That was definitely a plus. She sat down in the chair at the reception desk and stared at the blank computer screen. Tony was almost like an answer to prayer, though she hadn't actually expected an answer so soon. Maybe it was because Lucia had been praying as well. Did that matter? Did God put more preference on the prayers of some people over others? Somehow she doubted it. But the possibility that her prayer would be answered so soon was hard to comprehend, especially when she'd spent most of her life believing God didn't answer prayers. She would have to tell Lucia, but there was one person she wanted to tell first. As she pulled out her cell phone and dialed Carter, she thought about how weird it was that he was the person she wanted to call first. She'd been trying to protect her heart and keep a little distance between them, but it was hard. He snuck into her mind at random times throughout the day, and every moment they spent together, he seemed a little more changed, a little more reliable, a little more trustworthy. She wondered if she was changing too. The phone rang in her ear, and her heart tightened. She had no idea if he would be free, but she hoped she could catch him while he was on lunch break. "Hello?" He sounded out of breath on the other end, and April bit her lip, hoping she hadn't interrupted something. "Did I call it a bad time?" "No, you're fine. I was just on my way to practice after lunch. What's up?" "I wanted to see if you were free tonight to help me celebrate." "I don't know how late practice will run, but if it's not too late, then I'd love to. What are we celebrating?" "I found someone to rent one of the other rooms." "Wow, April, that is great. I hope practice isn't too long, because I can't wait to hear all about it. Gotta run, but I'll text as soon as practice is over." "Okay, sounds good." April ended the call and checked her watch. Her next client would arrive in half an hour. She better get to work. There would be plenty of time to rejoice tonight.